Executive Magazine, independent thinking for the discerning mind.
So the future is much worse than the past. So panicking about the current debt or the current deficit, which is just this year's deficit, seems to be silly when what you need to do is an adjustment that lasts over the next 5 decades. So my point is, let's care about the substantial issues, not the small ones. Now, how do you create that framework? By having budget processes that consistently monitor these numbers. Now, we don't do that. We, at most, look at the current deficit, at most, if we look at it. We don't have a sense of what is the path of spending for the government of Spain or France or the US going to look like over the next 30 years. What are the path of taxes? How are we going to make those two things compatible? That is very rare. I mean, we look at it as academics. Once in a while, we do a study of it, but governments don't do that when they do their budgets every year. And that's what needs to be done. I mean, there's a generic lesson which applies to Europe, applies to other countries, which is be careful when you start building imbalances. Do not believe the story this time is different. So this imbalance is different, therefore it's okay. When you see imbalances in current account, imbalances in debt, imbalances in leverage, it is very likely that something at some point will go wrong. And that's a lesson that applies to everyone. I think to Europe, what we've learned is that when you share a currency and you share a central bank, the level of integration of financial markets is such that you need to have an additional layer of integration that Europe does not have today. Now, at a minimum, you would start with financial integration and regulation. Now, some people will say, let's keep going, let's talk about fiscal integration, political integration. I don't think we need to go, obviously, to the end, but certainly there is something that goes with the monetary union, which at a minimum is about banking and regulation than at the European level. And banking regulation is very much associated with monetary policy in crisis. When there's no crisis, they could be completely independent. In fact, the world was moving in that direction, making banking regulation separate from monetary policy. Until the crisis hit, and all countries, including those who just have one country, one currency, are going back to a merge of the two because they understand that you cannot separate them. The main issue now is dealing with an accumulation of debt, which is clearly unsustainable. That requires changing your spending patterns. You cannot spend as much as in the past. That tends to lead to a recession because people don't buy. That tends to lead to bank starting getting close to failing, or at least having balance sheets that are getting weaker because some people cannot afford paying back their loans. Now, that is, again, a textbook recession. We've had many of those. That requires an adjustment. Understand the losses as fast as possible so you don't hang to this process for too long. If you can get help from others to make that transition as smooth as possible, normally emerging markets go to the IMF for that help. In the case of Europe, the obvious help should come from Europe because Europe is a rich country, a rich region. So if you can make that, that makes things easier. But the first thing is understand the losses and understand that going forward, the spending patterns will be different.